So the market fix MEV. So the first question is, what do we need to fix? What's about fix? Or maybe quick intro. So maybe.
Sure. Stefan, co-founder, chief architect of Flashbots.
I'm Felix, technical lead at Code, Swap Code Protocol.
And I'm Yannick from Shutter Network.
So what's the problem?
I'll start by answering the question. No, the market is not going to fix MEV. Social consensus will fix MEV. Maybe. We'll see.
But yeah, the problem. So, I think Flashbots as a company was founded basically to answer this question, right? Like, what is MEV? What is the problem that causes to blockchains? Like, if there's going to be a chance for us to tackle it, like, probably it requires an organization that's exclusively focused on this challenge. And we've sort of tried to, as deliberately as possible, design an organization that's directed towards trying to answer and solve this problem. I think from like a technical level, the areas that we are particularly interested in looking at right now, the problem areas, I guess, from an MEV perspective, one of them is order flow, and my talk earlier was sort of covering that. The second one is cross-domain MEV. And then the final one, in my opinion, is going to be latency, and latency is going to be sort of the big challenge that's going to rear its ugly head in the future. If we find solutions for each of these three key problems, then probably MEV will be nearly solved.
I would say those are kind of domains, but to what extent are those problems? So kind of what is the situation we don't want to end up with, or what?
Right. I skipped a couple logical steps there. So the problem is centralization, right? The problem is that you end up through MEV having returns to scale in a way that you get super linear value relative to your share of the network, and therefore you're able to compound into controlling more and more of the network. This MEV supply chain that I often talk about, once you dominate a single level of it, you have an incentive to integrate vertically up the supply chain and control more of the network. There's just a lot of things in MEV that leads towards natural monopolies, and natural monopolies means centralization, means censorship, means all kinds of other problems. So the problem is, centralization. The solution is decentralization.
Yeah, I would go even further and say, well, I mean, that is one way to look at it from the Ethereum side of things. What is the risk to Ethereum? And I agree, centralization is an existential risk. To me, MEV is like the biggest problem we can face on the layer one today. At CowSwap, we usually try to take the view of more the trader or user perspective, and there the problem really is MEV is a tax on your activities on, chain. And so if we want Ethereum to become the global settlement layer for most of our financial activity or even non-financial activity, then we need to fix MEV in order for it to be a viable system for everyday users to use the system. And so MEV as a tax on usage and trading for us is the problem that we would like the market to fix.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have to agree with both of them. Mostly also with Felix, that users don't get as much out of their transactions as they should be, because miners or validators are extracting this in MEV, and we should improve the situation for these users. Often the users also don't know about this, so it's very hard for them to quantify how much they actually lose. But maybe to add another thing, it's also a bit of a problem for application developers. So in some sense, MEV is helpful. It can be used as a tool for application developers, but they also have to consider another as another attack vector in some cases. So that's maybe another problem, that applications become more complicated to implement.
If we agree that kind of the consensus was around centralization is the main issue, I think then we should further specify what is being centralized. And kind of one of the questions or maybe critiques I have is to say we don't want to centralize validators. I think that's pretty clear. We don't want to have kind of just 2 or 3 entities. But to what extent, and that's my to what extent are we fine with then centralizing other roles? So I mean, concretely in this builder-proposer separation, in a way, yes, we might then have more validators, but those have yeah, potentially less responsibility. So kind of, how do you see that?
Yeah, you want to decentralize every single piece as much as possible. Builder centralization is a risk. It's a problem. I think the more centralized builders end up being, the more power that they have over the rest of the network, the more that they can do. In theory, with PBS, they can't really affect protocol rules, right? They can't just decide to fork on their own because they need to convince a bunch of different validators to fork. But you know, a centralized builder that's dominating the network, producing the most valuable block, can kind of bribe people to like implement protocol level changes. And so, like, while the structure of the market itself doesn't mean that this party is going to have direct control, they can have economic control, and that can be like sufficient to enact change. So, yeah, you want to decentralize every bit.
Yeah, I think the, I guess, and you said it in your talk, we heard it also in Anna's talk, basically what PBS does is it moves the centralization interface or facade one layer back, and maybe there are solutions of how we can move it even further back. Now the focus, I also understand from the Flashbots team, is to actually decentralize the builder role. At Cow Protocol, we actually have one entity which is somewhat similar to the builder. It was part of Anna's presentation. We have these solvers, the relayers that compete for the user's order flow, not in the form of transactions, but in form of trade intents. And we have actually spent the last 6 months trying to decentralize that role. Just after the spin-off, Cow Protocol has launched an incentive program for external solvers to come online. At the time, there was only solvers that were operated by Gnosis doing the matching. At this point today, we have 5 external entities in production right now, and we're trying to, we're working with 5 more parties roughly, so we're hoping to have 10 external solvers in production by the end of the day. And I think kind of the journey we went through there with decentralizing this critical road to the protocol is something that, well, hopefully we'll see in PBS as well, and maybe we can work together with Flashbots or whoever is working on these, building these builders. Eventually, Cow Protocol might want to become a builder themselves as well. But yeah, I think I totally agree that we need to decentralize all these roles, and I think Cow Protocol has shown in the last 6 months that it's possible. So I'm fairly optimistic on, given the right set of fundamentals, having a low barrier to entry, having a permissionless system, and kind of all these things that are required there, that this is possible. My worry is that if we have 2 mechanisms kind of competing against one another, and one is specifically more profitable for one party in the network, let's say the validators or the builders, there might be some forces that, or some collusion at stake that will prevent these more user-friendly and I would say overall better market mechanisms to take prevalence, as we have seen in traditional finance, where I guess exchanges have also dominated the choice of mechanism for traditional financing. But yeah, that's maybe going a bit far.
I have a follow-up question. What is sufficient decentralization of the builder role?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for sure it has to, I guess one decentralization aspect is also how easy is it to join in case you see something going south, right? Like if you were seeing, like there was the socket MEV Day, which I thought was interesting, that also looked at censorship from 2 different angles. One is like temporary censorship, where maybe your transaction, instead of getting mined in the next block, it may get mined in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 blocks, which is less of a bad censorship than if you're actually banned from the network and you're not going to get mined at any point in time. And so for decentralization, I think, if you want to throw a number at me, I guess it also depends on the mechanism. It depends to the level of collusion that's necessary to attack the mechanism. If it's 1/3, 50%, 2/3. At Cow Protocol right now, we're aiming for 10 solvers by the end of the year. I think that's an ambitious goal. If that's sufficient, I wouldn't be confident saying that. I think eventually it would be nice to have builders that you can spin up on demand. Kind of if you run a DApp node, you have like a package that says, okay, I have like a standard builder that is ethically compliant with what I want, and I can run it and spin it up in case I feel like the system is not healthy, or I see like this. We had this talk by Vitalik as well. If we feel there's a consensus attack, then making it easy for everyone in the network to participate is kind of key there.
Okay, some of the things I picked up on there was like censorship resistance and collusion resistance are kind of like the 2 big metrics to look at from a decentralization point. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Are there other things?
You tell me. Do you think there's other things?
No. No, to me, I think those are the main things, but it's so okay.
I think one thing might be security of the network. So you want to have lots of validators, because if you have lots of validators, you have lots of stake, and that increases the security of your protocol.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, do you see there is a role, or is there a role for, regular stake-at-home, super small builders?
Stake at home. Super
No,
small builders.
like, is there a role?
Can I
for,
run a builder at home?
Or I mean, like, stake at home. So kind of you have 32 Ether and that's it, but you're building your own blocks. Is there a role for those guys?
I see. Without relying on like outsourcing the block construction.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Probably not. Probably not. I think the open question is like, how commoditized is block building going to be, right? Like, is it going to be, the algorithm is open source and like we know what the optimal construction looks like. The order flow is like universally accessible and there isn't like the problem of exclusive order flow. And like really the only problem with operating a builder is the same as operating a validator, which is you want to be on a performant machine and keep it online. If we get to that point with block builders, I think we'll be in a really good place. But there's a lot of different things to solve before we're able to determine if that's where things are going.
Do you guys think the public mempool as we know it, or as we used to know it, will continue to exist in the future?
I hope so. Because the alternative is private mempools, and private mempools are, I think, susceptible to censorship, because it means that your transaction is only seen by a few parties, whereas if you send it to a public mempool, basically everyone sees it, and everyone has the option to include it.
Yeah, I also feel like we have to keep the existence of the public mempool alive. Otherwise, we are not building a better system than what traditional finance has built. And actually, one thing that I sometimes think about when I see this MEV supply chain graph from user has an intent, submits it to the wallet submits a transaction to the builder, and the builder submits a block to the validator. I kind of overlay the traditional finance when you have your account at your broker is selling your order flow, your broker is basically your wallet is selling your order flow to a wholesaler or like a market maker, hedge fund, which is basically your searcher or your builder in this case, and then that entity is forwarding your settlement and actually doing whatever T+2 settlement with one of these clearinghouses, and then I feel like, wow, okay, so we've rebuilt the traditional finance settlement flow in DeFi, and
50 seconds instead of 2 days.
Okay,
we did it, guys.
No, I mean that's
we
nice.
did it.
That's great. But yeah, I mean, there's this quote by Matt Levine that DeFi is frequently, or blockchain in general, is frequently just reinventing 100 years of financial history. And I feel like sometimes when I see this chart, I'm like, wow, okay, this is us reinventing traditional finance.
So, what is different? Is there anything different, or are we just?
There isn't regulatory capture yet.
Really?
I don't think so. So, what is different? I think what's different is the people that are in this room, the people that are in our community that talk about these problems openly and publicly and care about maintaining the decentralization of the system. I don't think that this is something that ever existed in traditional finance. When a lot of these electronic trading systems got developed in the late 90s, early 2000s, it wasn't like everyone knew that it was going to get digitized and it was going to have these centralization effect and these market makers were going to become dominant. You couldn't really predict that. People were just trying to do things that they thought would make the market more efficient, right? Hey, maybe if we just take all these traders that are running around Wall Street and screaming at each other and replace them with a computer, the markets will be better. And so, they were trying to improve things. I think now we have this incredible opportunity where we see how that played out. We see sort of the dynamics of the market structures that evolved out of it. And we have the tools to be able to create alternatives and explore alternatives. So for as long as I think there's a community and there's this social consensus, this social belief in wanting to improve the way things are, then we still have a chance to change it. About the transaction pool question that you asked earlier, I don't think that the transaction pool as we know it today is going to stick around. And I don't think that that's a bad thing either. I think it's a bad thing if it gets replaced by something that doesn't add additional value. But in my talk earlier, I sort of looked at, okay, well, what does a good order flow system look like? And the transaction pool was sort of mediocre on all of my criterias. So I think that it will be seceded or it will be replaced by something that's materially better. I don't know exactly what that is, and there's probably a bunch of trade-offs involved in the design, but it will evolve to be something different.
Yeah, I mean, but maybe just again to paint the picture of what could happen, I guess, in the worst case. In the worst case, wallets would, essentially directly send their transactions, aka orders, to maybe just one builder, and then of course that builder, will almost always win the blocks because they have additional order flow, and maybe they can kind of offer something to the users so they continue to do that. But again, it has this very, very severe centralization force. Yeah.
Maybe the other aspect for why the public mempool can actually continue to exist is that I'm personally quite hopeful that we can actually reduce the amount of MEV that we expose in users' transactions. And the only reason we need these private mempools is for transactions that are prone to MEV. And I think there's been some research already done. I think we can do much more to actually build market mechanisms that reduce the amount of MEV. Of course, there's still the question, what will we do with the leftover? I'm still positive that most types of MEV can actually be addressed at the DApp layer, or at least the distribution can already be kind of enshrined into the DApp layer. I think one worry that I might have, and I think that's kind of where will the market fix MEV, is if these kind of mechanisms, even if they were proposed and implemented, would they get to adoption, and if not, would it be just on a user experience level, or could it be potentially be even on a level that builders said, well, this is a mechanism that eats my lunch. I'm not going to mine transactions that are using this protocol because it's trying to prevent MEV. And so that to me is the market force fear that I have, which would be similar to what happened in traditional finance, not willing to implement batch auctions, for example, because you can get a lot of money from co-location. Will the market fix MEV by actually letting the best and user-protected protocols exist and win?
That is maybe a segue to something you have been working on. Maybe you can describe that.
What exactly?
No, chatterized.
Okay, beacon chain.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically the mechanism, as Felix says, the goal is to reduce MEV, or that might be one good thing to do. And one way to do is to use encryption. If your transaction is encrypted, you don't expose all the information that your transaction contains to the person who includes it in a block, so they can't extract the MEV, basically. And ideally, that MEV stays for yourself, and only after the transaction is included in the chain, then it will be decrypted. That's one approach that's independent of the application layer. It can be done for all kinds of transactions, but and it has some advantages, but also some disadvantages.
What do you see are the chances that kind of those more fundamental changes will be done on protocol level?
I personally think that one really nice advantage of PBS is that we can actually experiment with all these different types of builder models in a way. We can have a pay for order flow builder. We could have a shutterized builder. We could have a cow builder. Like we can actually, prior to committing to what is the best layer one solution to MEV, experiment with some of them, and hoping that the market doesn't get screwed or prevents the best one from winning, could experiment at a faster pace than if we were to do the research now and had to pick one up front.
Yeah, we had actually this conversation privately earlier, and I think actually it's probably not on the builder level that you do different strategies, but on the proposer level. Maybe you can expand on that.
The builder is not a perfect abstraction. There's still a bunch of powers that remain with the proposers. One fear that I have is that Flashbots becomes it slows down innovation on mitigations, and it sort of becomes like a gatekeeper on deployment of novel solutions that can help target some of these gnarly problems. And I think like the MEV boost abstraction is good, like it achieves the stated outcomes that it has, but I don't think it's like the perfect solution. And so if we get into a world where like this becomes a new default and you're stuck into only building things on top of it because nothing else is going to end up being adopted, I think that's materially worse for the ecosystem. I'm pretty optimistic about layer 2s and alternative chains implementing some of these other tools so that we like see a counterfactual, right? Like what is an alternative deployment using like a similar EVM, type structure end up doing to the MEV market on those chains? I think there's a lot of room for iteration on that front, and as much as it's possible to combine different techniques like what shutterized block building plus outsourced block building through MEV Boost, I think there's a lot of benefit to it.
Yeah, the point I was just trying to make, why I think it's on the proposer level and not necessarily the builder level, is that MEV Boost essentially says, okay, I'm now a proposer, and I'm just kind of asking many builders and take who's bidding the most, but I don't actually care about the strategy. There could be an alternative solution where I, as a proposer, I do kind of commit to a specific strategy, and probably that would only make sense for larger kind of validators. But if you are, well, an exchange or one of those, even Rocket Pool, Lido, whatever, and you have, let's say, 10-15% of the staking power, you could say, on the blocks I propose, I'm using a strategy other than kind of just selling it to the highest bidder. Instead, let's say I just do real-time transaction ordering. So as transactions come in, I commit to do this exactly in that sequence. And potentially, people are willing to then pay an extra fee to specifically submit their transactions in a block that such a proposer is doing. And I guess, shutterized beacon chain could be one strategy for such a proposer.
Yeah, but why wouldn't you implement such a mechanism at the builder level?
Well, I think the builder can give way less guarantees. So as a proposer, you can give a strong guarantee that, well, you will propose it. As a builder, you can only say, well, I'm using this strategy, but it's quite likely that another builder will outcompete me on this block.
Another way to say it is like, if the proposer is only communicating with one builder, then you can do it. But if they're profit switching between multiple different ones, then you have some execution risk that you have to model in.
Yeah, but I guess the proposer could commit to only using, like, if they want to do this choice, then it might be easier to just pick a builder that does the job for them.
I mean, fair enough. So kind of, no, I think, it's possible on both sides. So kind of, if you only submit your transaction, for example, to a specific builder that commits to a specific strategy, then you might also not care whether they, well, eventually maybe they will get a block where they are picked, and as long those transactions essentially stay private within that builder. So yeah, you're right. Cool. Can we open it up for questions?
I have a question, I think.
Please.
So what on the transaction pool level, we talked about like privacy being like a direction that things can go. Are there other like features or innovations that like are low-hanging fruits for the transaction level? Kind of a broad question, but I'm curious.
I guess your escalation or escalator model, it's a low-hanging fruit, and it also seems very useful.
Oh, I think there are plenty. So, I mean, one thing I would love to see is that you make transactions that are valid, or where you can define a few, kind of storage slots or state, and it's only the transaction is valid, or the transaction is only valid if that storage slot has a specific value. And then you could even go a step further and say you can create a transaction that appends a pending transaction. So kind of, well, one obvious use case would be more efficient back running in a way, but another use case could be that you essentially build already those chains of transactions, which could also quite help for parallelization.
Yes. I'm very excited about that as well.
I think, I mean, personally, I would actually prefer most of these innovations happen on the intent level. Again, going back to your MEV supply chain, you have the user that has an intent of what they want to do. And it doesn't, Ethereum transactions are a pretty heavyweight thing to change and adjust. It will take months or years to make a change to that struct or to that model and create a hard fork. Whereas on the user intent level, if we can get dApps to care more about what does the user want, sign what you want and not how exactly you want to achieve that, we can have a lot of things like, I want, given that is the state, I want to do this. Like basically, you can I think encode a lot of these things. We talked also about the Dutch auction that you are proposing could be done on a dApp level, where you basically say, here's my limit price currently, and then it goes over time. It will go down as I'm not getting settled. I would prefer we do a lot of things on the intent level, because there we can already do stuff like batching people together, saving on gas costs, which ideally should then also affect the MEV footprint of the dApp, and do some other things that are just not possible on the transaction level unless we do really, really heavy redesigns of the protocol.
What do you think is missing to be able to do things at the intent level?
Maybe some more account abstraction on what you can, on meta transactions, basically, what you can execute on behalf of the user. I think there's also a lot of things we can do on the dApp level, like tokens having EIP 2612, the permit signature implemented, for example. And then I think it's generally user awareness and kind of re-educating users that signing a message is as powerful as signing a transaction, but actually a better user experience. Right now, there's still kind of this, I guess, would actually want to hear from other dApps what are the problems, but we've heard from our users that they are not used to signing a message, and therefore they're a bit like, well, what am I doing? Is this safe? Why don't I sign a transaction? And maybe it's just really a user education issue at this point.
And I would say kind of one more thing could be standard forms to broadcast those trade intents. So kind of a regular transaction you can put into the mempool. Maybe that's going away, but at least that's working pretty reliably. For that kind of signed message, this intent, it's not clear where to put it. So
Flashbot's Discord, usually.
Sorry?
Flashbot's Discord.
I tried. I put in my censorship detection contract in there, and no one picked it up. For very little people. It's just a side story. So yeah, the censorship resistant or censorship is a real problem. So yeah, I created this tiny contract that you can ping every hour. It will pay you $2, or it will pay you simply kind of what you spend in gas, but pay double it back. But it also sends one way to the Gitcoin address of the Tornado team, which is on a specific list. So it was kind of just a small exercise to see whether this contract gets called, and yeah, kind of on Flashbot level that such a transaction would currently get excluded. Yeah.
So we've got time for one last short question right here.
Do you think it makes sense to have a two-tiered product with different fee structures, whether the user would like to opt in for anonymization or not?
Once again?
Whether users would like to opt in or out of having the option of anonymization, like a two-tier product.
Opt into what feature? Anonymity?
Yeah.
Or just like privacy?
Well, some similar to a mixer, like which is different from what it does right now.
I'm not sure I follow, sorry.
I think we may have to save this question for off-chain, if that's all right with everyone. We're out of time. Thank you all for an excellent panel.
Thank you.